Welcome to the Dakota Live podcast. I'm your host, Robert Morier. The goal of this podcast is to help you better know the people behind investment decisions. We introduce you to chief investment officers, manager research professionals, and other leaders in our industry to help you sell in between the lines and better understand the investment sales ecosystem. If you're not familiar with Dakota and their Dakota Live content, please check out our website at dakota.com to learn more about our services. Before we get started, I need to read a brief disclosure. This content is provided for informational purposes and should not be relied upon as recommendations or advice about investing in securities. All investments involve risk and may lose money. Dakota does not guarantee the accuracy of any of the information provided by the speaker who is not affiliated with Dakota, not a solicitation, testimonial, or an endorsement by Dakota or its affiliates. Nothing herein is intended to indicate approval, support, or recommendation of the investment advisor or its supervised persons by Dakota. Today's episode is brought to you by Dakota Marketplace. Are you tired of constantly jumping between multiple databases and channels to find the right investment opportunities? Introducing Dakota Marketplace, the comprehensive institutional and intermediary database built by fundraisers for fundraisers. With Dakota Marketplace, you'll have access to all channels and asset classes in one place, saving you time and streamlining your fundraising process. Say goodbye to the frustration of searching through multiple databases and say hello to a seamless and efficient fundraising experience. Sign up now and see the difference Dakota Marketplace can make for you. Visit dakotamarketplace.com today. Well, I am thrilled to introduce our audience today to Andy Greene. Andy is the Chief Investment Officer at the Toronto Transit Commission Pension Plan, or TTC Pension Plan. Andy, welcome to the show. It's so nice to see you. Thank you for coming on from Toronto.
Rob, thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here as well. We have a lot of questions to ask you. You've had such a successful career, and we're so excited about what's been going on at TTC. But before we do, I'm going to read your biography for our audience. As Chief Investment Officer, Andy Greene oversees TTCPP's investment portfolio. Canada's TTC Pension Plan, the $78.2 billion defined benefit fund for employees of Toronto's public transport network, has been helping members ensure their secure financial retirement since 1940. The TTCPP is a jointly sponsored pension plan and is fully funded. Their goal is to provide their members with a reliable pension income they can count on for life. Members contribute to the plan and their employers and make equal contributions, which are collectively invested and managed by external investment managers. When a member retires, they receive a monthly income based on their average earnings and years of service. In his role, Andy oversees all investment functions, including investment strategy, portfolio construction, due diligence, and risk management. He has been a senior leader within the investment functions of TTCPP since joining the organization in 2017. Andy brings 25 years of pension and investment experience and has been responsible for establishing and developing the plan's investment team. Prior to joining TTC, Andy was the Director of Public Investments with OPTrust. While with OPTrust, Andy was responsible for oversight of external managers and portfolio management of long-only and absolute return investments for the public markets portion of the $25 billion defined benefit plan, which was about $9 billion in total assets. Prior to OPTrust, he worked at Northern Trust in investment manager research and portfolio construction for outsourced CIO clients, the University of Wisconsin Foundation as Associate Director of Investments, where he was responsible for equities, fixed income, hedge funds, private equity, and real assets investments for the Endowment, retirement, and operating funds. Andy also worked in consulting at Anco Consulting and Willis Towers Watson. Andy started his career on the broker-dealer side of the business at Smith Barney. Andy is a certified alternatives investment analyst and a certified investment manager, as well as a member of the Pension Industry Association of Canada, CFA Institute, and CFA Society Toronto. He is chair of the investment committee for the United Church of Canada Pension Plan and sits on the investment committee of York University Pension Plan. Andy holds an MA from Binghamton University and a BA from Ithaca College. Andy calls the greater Toronto area home, but was born in Miami, spent his early days in Chicago, and went to university in upstate New York. Andy, thank you for being here. Congratulations on all your success. It's really great to have you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let me get started by saying congratulations on being appointed Chief Investment Officer of the TTC Pension Plan in June of 2023 in what was a newly created role for the plan. So did you know the CIO seat was on the horizon when you joined the plan in 2017?
You know, I did know that it was going to be on the horizon. We didn't have a a plan, a dedicated sort of timeline. I think a lot of it was really, trying to show the value add of having a dedicated investment team. So maybe just stepping back for a second, when I joined, there was not a dedicated investment function. So I think it was a matter of showing that that we needed an investment person, and frankly, just it takes a couple of years to figure out if I was the right person to do the job. And so, I'm fortunate in the 6+ years I've been here to have been able to kind of slowly earn the trust of the board and our CEO.
Interesting. And congratulations again. I'm very excited to hear more about that building process. I didn't realize how quite entrepreneurial it was when you first started, being a one-man band, having to build out all the instruments and all the players. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Before we do, we always start at the beginning of people's careers. And, I'm a teacher. So in the classroom, I have a lot of students who are asking me, what they want to do with their careers. Were you familiar with the world of asset management and asset allocation? And how did the journey start for you initially?
It didn't. I guess I would say I didn't know about it, and I think because our industry is rather niche, and so I guess like a lot of us, I sort of fell into the industry. I came out of graduate school wanting to be an economist, and then kind of I think the reality of the job market and kind of what the opportunity set was. And frankly, it was through one of my best friends who was at the time was working at SEI. He told me what he did, and I thought that sounds pretty cool. And so I went and checked it out. And he at the time he left SEI and went to Smith Barney, and he told me about what he did, and there was a spot there, and I thought that sounds really interesting. Learning about asset allocation and manager search and selection. So. That's where I started at Smith Barney. I guess Smith Barney doesn't exist anymore, but working with high net worth and smaller institutional clients. So that was a great start for me. And then I think as I started to learn more about the industry and what interests me, I realized that maybe the retail side of the business was not quite for me. I still remember quite clearly sitting next to the bullpen where the young brokers were cold calling people and listening to that, and then occasionally getting walked out when they didn't hit their quota. And I think that made a real impression on me. And so, I learned from a couple of really good consultants at Smith Barney who were more focused on the institutional side. And that was really kind of what piqued my interest is more sophisticated types of investments and portfolio construction and just the groups of people that you're working with. So I found that really interesting. And so I wanted to move away from kind of the retail broker side of the business and wanted to move into more institutional. And I think it was funny in those days that the kind of your traditional pension consultant really, I think, put their nose up at the retail consultants. The quality of their work, despite our research teams being triple the size of, Mercer's or who's ever at the time. So anyway, I wanted to make this move into institutional, and it just took kind of a couple steps to get there. So my next move was I started doing consulting for high net worth individuals. So I worked in the wealth management group at Northern Trust. Working with kind of the super rich families there, and really, really enjoyed a lot of the work that we were doing there. And then from there, moved into kind of traditional pension consulting, where I worked at Anco and Willis Towers Watson, and those were really phenomenal experiences for me. Working with, one place, Anco tended to be more public fund and Taft-Hartley clients. And then when I was at Willis Towers Watson, a lot more corporate plans. And we also had a lot more healthcare clients. So that was a really interesting experience for me, and, really getting to kind of focus on more manager research, kind of higher level work. And then, had a great opportunity to leave Chicago and go to the University of Wisconsin a couple hours down the road, and had a really phenomenal experience at Wisconsin at the time. Yeah, I was like, this build out theme kind of is familiar because I joined the team at the time. It was in a build out. It was, I wasn't the first investment employee, but I was the second investment employee. And I got to work for a really fabulous CIO, David Erickson, who's now running Ascension Health, and really had a phenomenal 3 years working with David at the Endowment. And I would say I probably learned more in those 3 years than any other 3 year span of my career, just kind of given the environment, the types of investing we were doing. And we had a really top-notch investment committee that really, I could say this in hindsight, I can laugh about it now. They really challenged us. I mean, at the time they were really tough, but they were professional investors, very successful investors. And so, they were really able to challenge us. And then I moved to, after Wisconsin, I went back to Northern Trust, and that's what brought me to Canada. I moved to Toronto to work for Northern Trust in their OCIO business. Here, spent 3 years at Northern doing a mix of manager research, asset allocation, client service to our OCIO clients, and then had a great opportunity to move to OPTrust, where I spent 8 years. And I think you're going to ask some other questions about there, so I won't dig into that. And then had this phenomenal opportunity to come to TTC 6.5 years ago.
Two quick follow-up questions. Going back to the University of Wisconsin, you said you learned a lot of lessons. What's one of those lessons that you learned working in the endowment model that you've carried forward with you now in your seat as CIO at TTC?
Wow, that's an excellent question. I really think probably a couple things. I mean, I think it was the two things that kind of jump out at me were, one, governance. The governance model was, it didn't start out great, but it ended really fabulously, where we were, there was a broad board, but we were able to create a subcommittee of 3 people, and we would meet with them on a monthly basis. So we were able to make decisions, I think, very quickly, because we would go to those 3 people and get items approved or not approved. And so, that's where I would say I probably had my most challenging discussions. And, very often we would bring them work and we'd have our head handed to us and bring it back. And I think really getting challenged by very smart people, kind of really forced one to bring their A game every time and really make sure you did their homework. And I think the other thing was really just a kind of a focus on, what can go wrong, like not that things went wrong, but really try and look at an investment idea and try and look at different scenarios, not just say, okay, well, the 5 years let's just assume that that's going to continue forever. And so that the markets, the economy and things are fluid. And so to really kind of make sure that you really focus on what could go wrong. I mean, hopefully that's not going to be the case, but you need to know, okay, if your thesis doesn't play out, what do you do? And when do you kind of cut bait?
A good lesson on risk management. And Northern Trust, the outsourced CIO model has evolved quite a bit since you were working within that ecosystem. So as you remember your days working with clients on the outsourced CIO side of the business, what were some of those lessons learned from engaging directly with clients as it related to their asset allocation and portfolio construction? I'm assuming a lot of lessons were learned there as well, but I'm just curious, looking back, what you saw then, maybe what you're seeing now relative to what's happening in the industry.
Well, I would say probably compared to then, I mean, that was, that was like over 15 years ago. And I would say, I think part of it is people's, plans, asset allocations are very different now. I mean, probably back then the portfolios were more plain vanilla stocks and bonds, and you maybe had kind of 5 or 10% in alternatives. I mean, obviously at Wisconsin, we were north of 40, 50% alternatives, but your general kind of corporate client was pretty plain vanilla. And so I just think, I think the lessons learned were, maybe a lot of the folks that we were dealing with were not, they're often HR people, or they are the CFO who knows something about investing. And I think, it's kind of twofold. You have to really work to manage your message to the client. You think, oh gosh, a CFO, they must know all about investing. They don't necessarily, right? And I think, don't really assume that they know everything about everything, because I think that's often not the case. So I think, just trying to navigate that with the CFO is very different. I think you have to, dance around them a little bit more. They are the CFO. They tend to, it's a very important role. And I think they think about the pension differently than the HR person thinks about it. And I think that was one of the key is, how do I adjust the message depending on the audience, right? Because a HR person is more concerned about kind of overall level of benefits and communicating all this, whatever changes or whatever we're recommending to their beneficiaries. And I don't think the CFOs generally think about that. It's more black and white and about numbers.
Well, you made the jump, as you mentioned, up to Toronto. So, you're with OPTrust. You spent 8 years there, primarily on the public market side, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But I just want, for our audience who may be less familiar with the Canadian market, specifically OPTrust, it's officially the OPSEU Pension Trust. It's a legal trust formed by the contractual agreement between the two plan sponsors, Ontario Public Service Employees Union and the Government of Ontario. It manages one of Canada's largest pension funds and administers the OPSEU pension plan, worth approximately $25 billion. So what were those 8 years like for you, kind of cutting your teeth now at a plan sponsor, working directly in public markets at a shop that's quite large? I mean, the Toronto pension market in general, as we were talking about before we started recording, is really one of the largest in the world. So as you think about one of those real leaders in the industry, what was that time like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting. I mean, I think we maybe think of Toronto as sort of a pension mecca, right? I mean, it's we're quite fortunate, I think, to be surrounded by leaders like CPPIB and Ontario teachers that have really set the table, the standard, I guess, in terms of governance and investment acumen. So, the almost 8 years I spent there at OPTrust was really a great experience for me. At a size of about 25 billion, it doesn't compete with CPPIB or teachers or OMERS or any of those in terms of assets. Those are all $100 billion plus plans. But the difference is it's a $25 billion plan run like $100 billion plan, where they run a lot of things in house, much more so than other asset, more so than other plans. And I think when I joined, what happened was, I think they were really ahead of the pack in terms of private markets. So private markets, the team was pretty built out, and they were already doing a large number of co-investments or direct investments. And when I joined the public markets team, we were still, it was a bulk of the portfolio. But at that time, it was run mostly by consultants. So consultants were involved with a lot of the manager selection and monitoring and all that. And so the opportunity for me was to go in and build a platform around public markets. And, at the time, it was pretty substantial. And, it was a platform on how do we want to do manager search? How do we want to monitor, right? A lot of, when you talk, I'm sure you get this a lot when you talk to folks like me, we spend a lot of time monitoring, right? That's job number one, is focusing on what you have. And so it was building a platform. How do we monitor them? How do we do on-sites with them? What does portfolio construction look like for us? So it was really an opportunity to build all that. So take that away from consultants and build a platform. And, we added a couple of folks to that. I think, at our height, our public markets team was probably 9 people. And so it was a really great experience, I think, for me to learn how how the big guys do it and sort of the right way to do it. I think kind of in a perfect world, in a larger fund. And I think that is, I got a lot of benefit from that. And so what I've tried to do here at TTC is try and take a lot of the learnings of, what are the great things that these large plans do well, and where do they insource it, and how do they add value, and try and bring that to a much smaller fund. And obviously it's not directly transferable, right? We don't have an investment team of 100 people here. We have an investment team of 8. So trying to take some of the best things from the large funds and bring it to TTC.
Well, talk to us about those 8 people. So you and 7 others are responsible for the pension. Can you actually just quickly give us an overview for our audience? I obviously gave the background in the description of TTC's plan, but we always like to hear from the CIO, the mission as it relates to your team and what you're looking to accomplish day to day.
Happy to answer that. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to, what is the target return that we're trying to hit, our discount rate. It moves around a little bit, but right now as it stands, our target return is 5.5%. We are a fully funded plan, north of 110% funded right now. And so we're in a position where we can, I think, take our foot off the gas a little bit in terms of risk because we're very well funded, but we're an open plan. So we're still growing. So we can't just immunize and lock it up and hand the keys over to an insurance company, right? So what we're trying to do is this 5.5% return. We are allocated roughly kind of 60% public markets, 40% private markets, and that has changed pretty dramatically in the 6 years. Obviously, kind of like most plans, we've increased our private market exposure pretty significantly. And so the team of 8 of us, I mean, I joined and was by myself for 2 years. I don't want to say I had no help. I did rely very heavily on the CEO and our CFO to help me. One person can only do so much. And then, what happened was when we were able to spin off from the TTCPP is an independent entity. So we run the money for the TTC, but we're a separate entity. And once that occurred, we were able to add some resources. So we've slowly been adding to the team. So right now there are 3 folks that directly report to me. There's a head of public markets, a head of private markets, and a head of investment risk and analytics. And the heads of public and private markets each have 2 people reporting to them. And we're about ready to put out a posting for another person on the investment risk and analytics team. So it's been kind of a slow build out over 6 years. And so you can appreciate some folks who are more of a generalist. And as we've started to grow, we've started to specialize a bit. So I would say, we still are a bit of generalists. I mean, public markets cover still equities, fixed income, and hedge funds, and private equity. Private markets is private equity, private credit, real estate, and infrastructure. So still a lot on our plates.
I read, I think it was last summer, you had said that TTC's aim is to reach approximately $10 billion in assets under management by 2030. So you mentioned, finding growth, even though you're fully funded. So where is that growth, in your opinion, going to be coming from? And can you share a little bit more about the long-term goals of TTC before we get started in kind of more of the granular due diligence side of our conversation?
Sure. I mean, our goal, I mean, we're not an organization that's looking to probably become a outsourced CIO for other pension plans. We've seen that trend really occur. It's really picked up in Canada. You've got some groups like the Investment Company of Ontario, the University Pension Plans, and the College of Applied Arts and Technology, CAT, all looking to take on third-party assets. We're just going to grow organically, and really that's a function, I think, primarily of our membership is growing. So yes, we are as a pension plan, we are aging like any defined benefit plan. Our ratio of active to retirees, it used to be 3-to-1 years ago, like most DB plans. And now it's a little over, it's kind of 1.5-to-1 right now. And that'll slowly become 1-to-1, like most defined benefit plans. But we are trying to grow. And we do think, with that, at that growth rate of, I said 5.5%, but really we're shooting for something north of that. We think we'll get to that 10 billion kind of through organic growth. And I think, one of the things about getting there is we just think that, a larger asset base, and as we grow, it sort of warrants or enables us to add some more people, because as anybody can appreciate, it's a bigger base to spread out fixed costs over, right? So, we are trying to grow as an organization. We're trying to, whether it's, on the investment side, we're trying to bring more investments in-house. We do rely on consultants in some areas, but we're trying to, much like we did at OPTrust, trying to do more of that ourselves, right? So whether it's, long only things, we do all that ourselves. In some other asset classes, we do rely on consultants. And I think over time, we'll continue to bring that more in-house. Not that we're going to do direct deals, but I do think that we could bring manager selection in-house more. And I think the challenge for us will be, as we continue to look at co-investments, that's sort of a unique spot to try and due diligence, and it requires a certain skill set. So as a whole, the organization is just trying to grow and I think become more professional, right? I mean, I think that was, if I go back to your earlier question about the CIO title, I think it's just a realization that we've I think graduated to hopefully the big leagues in terms of pension plan management. I think along with kind of my promotion in the summer, we hired our first HR person in the spring. So I think it's like we're becoming a proper organization now. And I think, what we're doing is, looking at all the things that we're doing. And, I think we've done a pretty good job of picking up everything. But, I still think things fall through the cracks, or things that we could be doing better. And, in our case, our team is just trying to get a better handle on the portfolio, whether it's going to AGMs more than we have in the past because we didn't have the people and we didn't have the budget. Well, now we have more people and we now have more budget to go to AGMs. So, rather than that knowledge going to consultants, we're trying to bring that knowledge in-house. And frankly, I think it makes for a more interesting job for my team, right? I think we're more likely to keep people if they're not just, paper pushers, right? Like if they're actually investing. I think that makes a big difference.
I also think it makes a big difference growing with the business. If you're really growing and you're seeing your business grow and you're seeing the organization grow and your people, your employees, your team is growing with it, that feeling of being aligned, with the organization goes a really long way. So it's fun. It sounds like you're at a startup pension fund. You don't get that often.
It is. I mean, I think, to be honest, yeah, I mean, it's really lucky. I mean, that's part of the reason why I joined, right? It was a startup. Who know, it may not work out, but I think to be honest with you, that's how we've also been able to attract talent because people see us as a startup. The team, I'm really lucky. We have a really entrepreneurial, very smart team, and so people can add a lot of value by just coming up with stuff on their own. My team very often will come up with even people that have been here years are still coming up with new and better ways to do things.
What I love about it is that the equity owners are the plan participants. So 100%. That's what makes it so unique. Well, maybe thinking about that plan. So starting with asset allocation. So, the team is sitting around the table. Obviously, the table has already been set. But what did that process look like from a top-down perspective? Whether it was risk budgeting or more traditional, asset allocation work. How did the top-down come together?
So it's really more of a top-down approach. We have not. I mean, I think it's a mix of both, right? I think it's probably mostly top-down, but also we're investors in all these asset classes, and we know where we are seeing more opportunity. And I know you're gonna ask some questions about that a little later. But I really think it's a mix of both. I mean, I think it's mostly top down. We do an asset liability study generally every 3 years with an outside consultant to help us set the asset mix. But that asset mix is really driven a lot by the team. So we do have a lot of input to say, you know what, we kind of like these asset classes a little better. Can we lean a little bit more? So we're able to kind of nudge the asset allocation, and even then, it's a very broad framework, and we do have some wiggle room where we can underweight or overweight certain sectors, even within the asset mix. So the asset mix will set up something we call the SIP in Canada. I know in the States you call it the IPS, but basically it'll set a framework of minimum and maximum, to each asset class, and then we as staff have leniency to kind of work within those. And so we will take certain tilts in our portfolio, within the SIP. And then occasionally, like we did in 21, you may fall outside those guidelines a little bit because of the denominator effect. If you think back when equities, fell pretty precipitously a couple of years ago, we put us off sides in a couple asset classes. But, thankfully the board was able to, not force us into kind of a fire sale just because we're a little overweight. I don't think that happens much in pension plan world, but, I know it does if one is maybe egregiously out of whack, but, we were able to kind of let it slide. And now we've kind of gotten back a little closer to kind of our target range, but we typically kind of keep it within kind of plus or minus 2% of our targets.
So once an asset class has been identified where you need to address either an existing manager, or you are looking to potentially add a new manager, what does that underwriting process look like? So if you could walk us through that chronology of events as it relates to really the manager research process itself.
So maybe I'll use an example. We had a new asset class in the last AL study, multi-asset credit. And one of the things that we did was we kind of went back to our actuary and said, okay, what is the experience that you're modeling? We don't necessarily need to 100% match it, but we know in an asset liability study, that's kind of the exposure, or that's the role in the portfolio. And we also had IG credit as a standalone bucket. So that was, so what we did was that kind of made us focus on what do we want to achieve. So we said, okay, we've already got investment grade, multi-asset credit. So when we want to go out and look for multi-asset credit managers, well, we've already got IG. So it kind of brought us a discussion. It's like, do we want a manager that could have multi-asset, IG and multi-asset credit? Because a lot of the universe want to move across everything, credit, right? And they would say, well, IG credit is one of the levers that we would like to pull. But in our case, it was somewhere that we already had exposure and we felt we already had enough. So we said, okay, let's go out and look for the universe of multi-asset credit managers that can do a mandate kind of like the one we're looking for. We don't want the investment grade, but what do we want? Right. So that brought a lot of other questions in, because of course you want high yield and loans, but then we started to get into some asset classes where it gets kind of tricky, where you go, well, are CLOs, are those public or private? Yes and yes, right? Like it's sort of both, right? So what that did was it kind of created a discussion between the public and private teams, and we go, well, where does do we have CLOs and other structured credit in our private bucket? If not, where do we want to put it? So it kind of created a discussion. I will say it was actually a good discussion amongst the team on where do we think the right place for that to fit is. And in our case, we thought the right case was to put it in public credit, in this multi-asset credit. So it was okay, we want to attack the space. What are the managers? What types of strategies do we want to use? And then it's a portfolio construction discussion about what strategies do we want to cover, and how do we want to hire dedicated managers and EM and high yield and loans? Do we want to hire all these dedicated managers, or do we want to kind of hire a multi-strat? And in our case, because we're a smaller team, and even when we did the search a couple of years ago, we were a couple of people smaller than that, and we just said, look, we want to hire somebody that we think that can move, that there's alpha and beta in moving from high yield to loans to structured credit. So that's kind of the way that we did that. And then it's how do we find a manager like that we think can add value in not only each of the individual plus sectors, but can add value in making that tactical decision when to move from asset class to asset class. And so really it was in that case, it took us a lot of analysis to look at, how good is the manager in each of those sleeves, knowing that they're probably not going to be good in all of those sleeves, but we just want to make sure at least, that beta exposure to each of those pieces was good. And then trying to look at their attribution and look at, do they have the skill to time when to move from sector to sector? So it was kind of a two-stage search in there. And then it's really a focus on, in our case, because we're doing the search, we're doing a list of, it's kind of the typical, the 5 Ps of people, process, philosophy, performance, and really kind of going through each of those to understand, who has the right firm. We don't have a bias towards small managers or big managers. I mean, there's pros and cons of both. And so when we went through that, there's the pros of the big shop and all the compliance people and legal, and I can sleep well at night and I'm probably not going to get fired for hiring X. But on the other hand, some of these managers are much too large, and it really hinders their ability to add alpha. So we looked at kind of a mix of both. And then, looking at the experience and the people and their experience, their incentive, are they aligned to add money, or are they just asset gathering, right? So, it's the whole, let's talk to the team. How much money do they have in the strategy? What's their experience in the strategy? And the key, I think, to any of these is, which is very hard to quantify, is this competitive advantage. And is it sustainable, right? And I think that's the biggest variable in manager selection. We can look at quantitative analysis, and it's great for determining if they've been able to do that in the past. In this case, you have some comfort if we think, okay, they're really good in all these sectors, and unless they get stupid suddenly, they should be okay. But is there depth there, and people leave and life happens. So, what's the depth of the team? And then, I think it's important for us to go out and meet these folks. So, it's interesting. I think a couple of years ago, trying to do due diligence in a COVID world, where we were not able to do the on-sites and, a physical on-site. I mean, everything was done virtually. And now we're back to a mix of, I think, virtual and in person. So what we do now, right, is we try and do a lot of the upfront work on Zoom calls, and then as we get really close, we've been back for a couple of years now, back to going on site and meeting the not just the key decision makers, but meeting with a number of people on the team. And we always like to meet the junior person and understand why they joined the team and what their onboarding looks like. And because, the top person they're always very smart and charismatic. And so I think it's really trying to get a sense of some other folks. And I think that really helps, with one's conviction when that there's not just one person pulling the strings.
Is that what helps you inform the culture? So how are you ascertaining the culture of an organization? It sounds like, the start off process, which makes a lot of sense. I think one thing, that's come out of COVID as it relates to Zoom is that you can kind of cast a wider net and not have to travel to various cities, and you can pack in more meetings, particularly when you're trying to narrow a universe. But once you do go on site, in addition to meeting the team, the juniors, how do you ascertain a culture? How do you understand the character of a portfolio manager or the team? It's a question I ask a lot because it's probably arguably the fuzziest part of the manager research process. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I wish I had some unique special sauce on this one. I really do think you're trying to, I think, understand. I always find it's helpful if the potential, the candidate or partner, if they understand what you're trying to achieve. I think or do they do more talking or do they more listening? And I find very often the more asking questions and listening is really a good sign, because I think they really, they think of it more of a long-term partnership. I mean, they're more interested in what we're trying to achieve, not just trying to sell us a product and how can they cross-sell something else, right? I mean, I think that happens very, very often. I think, also, if a manager is not willing to put their best foot forward right out of the gate, I really wonder what client service is going to look like a year from now, right? If it tends to often drop off from there. So I think it's how transparent they are, how willing they are to let you speak to numerous members of the team and make people available. I find that very, very helpful. I also find, get a couple of them in the room together, particularly when it's a team. And I love watching the dynamics when someone's talking and looking at the other people. So usually, I know a lot of folks will do this. You'll go into a meeting. When we do due diligence meetings, they're never one person. They're often 2 or 3 people on our team. And often the role of the other people in the meeting, I'm example, if I'm leading the meeting, someone else on my team their job is, even if I don't tell them that, is to just watch the faces of the other people. Because you can see if someone's talking and the other person's checked out, that doesn't bode well for like a good team dynamic. That makes you wonder how they're looking, or they're rolling their eyes, or they seem kind of checked out. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, that's. I don't know how often you see something quite that egregious, but I just really think about looking how the team members, how do they work together. I think do they always defer to somebody? Does the senior person step back and let the junior person, or does that person want to do all the talking and monopolize the whole meeting? I think that just kind of gives you some insight into the organization. And I just, I really think trying to understand why they're doing it, right? Like, I know it's about the money, but, I think also really trying to understand, how they're getting compensated for this. And I think it's helpful to, when you're talking with them, particularly at big shops, they're not just running one strategy. What's their role on multiple strategies? Oh, I run this, in the example of multi-asset credit. Oh, I run multi-asset credit, but I also run the fund's high yield strategy. And then I run this core bond strategy. Well, I don't know. That seems kind of weird. There's some overlap there. What are the assets and where are you going to spend your time? What do you get paid on? Oh, you're running this hedge fund also on the side? Well, guess what? I think I know where you're going to spend most of your time, right? So even if you do have a good allocation policy. So, yeah, I just think that's a lot of it, trying to get a feel of the people. I think how they answer the questions, and also do they think, I think this move towards diversity of thought. I think there's something really kind of to that, because, it's I'll pick on my old hometown. It's if everybody went to University of Chicago and got an MBA, they're all super smart, but I don't know that that's diversity of thought, right? I think, people tend to kind of look at the same lens as things, or, I think that goes back to that whole point about risk management, or looking at what could go wrong. I think it just gives you a different lens to kind of look at ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot in there, a lot of good advice. One is, watch your facial expressions when you're meeting with your team. It's funny. Someone said to me that the best listeners are those who hear what's not said. So it sounds like you're listening to what's not being said, watching people's body language, watching their interactions. And I couldn't agree more on diversity of thought. When I think about some of the big issues that have taken place, particularly with quant funds that may be using a lot of the same factor-based models, a lot of times it's that lack of diversity of thought that gets the broader market into trouble. So I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned at the beginning that TTC has been increasing its allocation to private assets with a focus on private equity. I mean, I think we have a good sense of where private markets fit into the overall investment strategy. Right. But what are the opportunities that you're specifically seeing? Because it's so interesting. You are a startup. You're growing. Are you looking, for example, at early stage venture capital, or are you looking more at lower middle market private equity, or the rest of the cohort? Are we all looking at private credit? What's on the menu for you right now as you think about your private market exposure? Yeah,
I have to laugh about private credit. If we hear about private credit again, I think we're all going to be sick. But I would say it depends a little bit on each of our portfolios, because if I look at our private markets portfolio across kind of the four verticals, they're all at different stages of maturity. And private equity is the one that you mentioned that we're probably the least mature, and I would say furthest away from in terms of our target. And we have not, our portfolio, and I would say generally is in private equity, very mid-market focus. So I would say that mid-market is a focus of us, will continue to be a focus of us. Before we invest with almost no kind of large mega funds, to be honest, the big guys, because they're just too focused on asset gathering, in my view. And like a lot of others, I think, if you buy a mega buyout fund, it's like buying the S&P, right? It's the S&P of private equity. So in our case, we're not big investors in venture and growth equities. We're only, our target is about a third of our private equity portfolio. And I think that is really a function of, we don't need to hit the same kind of return targets that an endowment needs to hit. And that's why, 50 or 60% of their portfolio is in venture. I also think it kind of goes back to, what is our competitive advantage? Our competitive advantage is not in venture capital, right? I know a lot of our peers have dedicated Menlo Park offices somewhere on Sand Hill Road, or, Boston or Austin, where all these things are occurring. We just don't have the competitive advantage there. We don't have a team of people dedicated to venture. That all being said, I think venture is kind of interesting. Maybe it's a bit contrarian, because when everybody hates it, venture is really important, and knowing that there's a real shortage of cash in the venture space makes that kind of interesting. So I think, even though it's a small part of our portfolio, I think we'll probably tilt a little bit more than we have in the past. I am tilting maybe in other parts of the book. For example, we're big fans of infrastructure. I think compared to a lot of the U.S. plans, we have a 12% allocation to infrastructure. And that's a space that we like very much, not just the transition side, where obviously there's huge opportunities there, but just generically, it's a really great space. It's immature as an asset class. And we find that the GPs are really, because of the state of infrastructure, the GPs are much more kind of friendly to work with us on terms, LPAC seats, and co-investments than some of the other areas. And so that's an area where we're kind of, I mentioned earlier being able to tilt. We're actually leaning more towards infrastructure than real estate. So we have a 12% allocation to real estate as well. We're actually a little bit over, but we're in the process of selling some industrial assets right now, and we'll just reallocate a little bit more towards real infrastructure. So I said we have kind of an overall allocation to real assets. So as long as we kind of stay within that overall band in real assets, we're okay. So that allows us to overweight infrastructure a little bit. And then I think within credit, we have pivoted a bit. We still like direct lending. That is still a significant part of our private credit portfolio. But more and more over the last kind of year and a half, we've been investing in more special situations type managers. Nobody calls it distressed anymore, but it's special sits, right? And the other spot, which I think is really interesting, is real estate debt. So, unfortunately, we're getting beat up like a lot of folks on the real estate equity side of our book, particularly office. But I think there's a real opportunity on the debt side because construction projects still need to happen. Developers still have projects half built that they need financing for, and we're able to get really attractive rates of return on that space. So those are kind of the areas that we're most excited about. I think the other one that we're debating pretty internally, pretty heavily is just emerging markets overall, because we know that emerging markets have had a really tough year. We know that China has really, really had a tough go. And China's really quite cheap, but there, doesn't seem to be a catalyst for change there. So that's a space that we're debating internally. How do we attack that space? And there it would probably be through public markets, given kind of rule of law challenges in dealing with private markets there.
One area we didn't touch on yet is the hedge fund portfolio. So the hedge fund allocation has evolved over the years, as I understand, with a shift towards a more concentrated and cost-effective direct hedge fund portfolio. So can you discuss a little bit the rationale behind that evolution and where and what is going on now within the hedge fund portfolio? So
when I joined, I inherited a hedge fund portfolio that was about 5% of assets. It's now 8%. And it was in two fund of funds. And so, as we all know, hedge fund of funds have generally, not all of them, have overly diversified, overly expensive, and haven't quite delivered on performance. And so we kind of looked at what is hedge funds 2.0 for us. And knowing at the time it was frankly just me, we hadn't hired anybody else yet. So what we did was we hired a consultant to build a discretionary and a discretionary mandate to build a hedge fund portfolio for us. So that has been done. We built at the time it was 20 names, and it was probably a little overly diversified. I think a couple of reasons, because we were getting money back in hedge funds from our fund of funds in a couple of tranches. And also we wanted, there's capacity constrained managers, and some managers can only take so much at a time. And we didn't want to just throw money in, we think, kind of the second class and third class of managers. So we kind of hired a couple more managers than we would have probably liked. And what we've done in the past, and over probably the last year and a half, is now that we've kind of gotten our roster of managers, and as the team has grown and we've gotten a better handle on those managers ourselves, we've started a process to reduce the number of managers. And so what we're doing is, in a number of areas, we're just, I think, doing what a lot of folks do, is just replace single strategy managers with some multi-manager, multi-strat. So we've been adding those, and we all know the challenges there. You're not going to get into Millennium and Citadel, even if you wanted to get in. So it's looking at some of the other names, and we don't want to put money to work in multi-strat if we don't find anybody good. So we're trying to, we've been trying to add some partners there. And I think, it's also trying to figure out which sort of niche strategies still make sense for us. So, as much as I've said, we've kind of moved towards multi-strat in a couple areas, across some broad asset classes. We still think we still have some specialists, and we still have some long short equity specialists, because we think in Asia, long short, that's the way to do it, or insurance linked. We've got a specialist there, right? An event driven. So we think or CTAs, we just think there's some cases where there's specialists. And I think what's happened is we've gotten better conviction and better understanding of our managers. And the way we're at right now is, we hired a discretionary a consultant to do it on a discretionary basis. But a couple things I would say, Rob, have changed that have enabled us to what we're in the process of doing is trying to take over the portfolio right now from the consultant. And I think the two things that have changed and allowed that to happen, I mentioned the better knowledge of our funds, but also our resources have changed. So now we have a couple more folks. So now we've got a 3-person public markets team instead of just me. So we can now, we just hired a gentleman who kind of really brings a hedge fund specialist background. And I think the other thing, which is not really sexy, but the governance has changed at our organization. So, one of the things that I think I'm probably most proud of is, when I joined, is any manager that was hired had to go to the investment committee. And you can imagine trying to build a hedge fund portfolio of 18 or 20 managers, and I've got to bring every manager in front of the investment committee. That would take, 2 or 3 years. And so that's part of the reason why we hired the mandate that we did. We hire somebody on a discretionary basis. They could hire all the managers. Well, I think what's happened is because, I've been with the organization for almost 6.5 years. Our CEO has been here about 8 years. I think that there's a level of trust that is, trust is earned. It's not just given. It just takes a while. Trust doesn't happen in 6 months. It takes years. And, in our case, when the board turns over a bit here and there, that process takes a little longer. But I think the board really trusts us. And so as a result of that, earlier this year, I would say probably right before I got my promotion, the board granted us authority to hire and fire managers. So I think that governance changing has really allowed us to take on a more hands-on role and not have to use consultants. So, it's a portfolio that we think we manage. We think we have all the bases covered, and we think, the reality is with a more concentrated portfolio, and that's what we do in the rest of the portfolio. We tend to run a more concentrated portfolio because the reality is, look, we get better client service, we get better fees and better transparency. I know managers say they treat everybody the same, but they don't treat everybody. They can't, right? You always treat your biggest clients. You spend more time with those clients. So that's kind of the rationale for doing that.
Well, a big question to ask you at the end of this portfolio discussion, but what are some of the risks that you're seeing as we go into 2024? We're about to close out the first month. The question that gets asked often is, how are you avoiding these risks? But how are you capitalizing on these risks? So as you think about some areas of opportunity that may be coming up as a result of some of the challenges that we're facing, either politically, economically, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I'll take a shot at that. I mean, I think, the biggest risks are, I think a couple. I mean, the geopolitical one is an easy one to point out. Everybody knows about what's going on there. And obviously, the worry is things get worse before they get better. And I think at a high level that has us a little defensively positioned. So that regards, I've kept us kind of a little underweight emerging markets and some other areas, even kind of equities. I would say right now we're a little more tilted towards bonds, and part of it is bonds are not so crummy anymore, right? If you're looking for a 5.5% return, I can sit on bonds and get most of the way there. And wait to see what happens. I think that, one of the worries, and it's definitely borne itself out a little bit more in the last few weeks, is, the expectation was that the Fed and in our case, the Bank of Canada, were going to cut rates much faster. And now there's been a bit of a realization that that's, particularly in the US, is not going to happen. And I think here it's a little different in Canada. I think Canada, we're going to be forced to cut rates sooner because partly because in the U.S. your mortgages are 20-year mortgages. Here in Canada, we can only get 5-year mortgages, and a lot of them are floating rates. So I think a lot of it is we're just feeling a lot more pain, and we have a much more inflated housing market compared to the U.S. So I think the Bank of Canada is going to see, people personal bankruptcies are going up, credit card delinquencies are going up. So I think that is an area of concern, and that doesn't really answer your question about where how do we take advantage of that. And so I think where we're trying to get advantage of that is on some of the asset-based lending. We think spreads are very attractive, and so there's a lot of concern about defaults. We're still moving into credit. I still, probably a little more measured because of the worried about the defaults haven't really happened. Like they've picked up, but I was wrong all last year. I was underweight high yield and all that because I just kept thinking spreads had to blow out, and then they would blow out a little bit and then come right back in. So, I think in our case, it's really some of it is just trying to be smart in how we're, it's kind of cliche, but pick up pennies and nickels where we can, whether it's, structuring deals. Like one of the things that I can't take credit for, my head of private markets has done is, a lot of people have had the issue with the denominator effect and wanting to go back to GPs and going, oh, sorry, I can't re-up because I don't have enough capital. And one of the things that she's come up with, which I give her a lot of credit for, is going to the GPs and say, you know what, we would normally write you a check for, let's keep it simple and say $30 million. You know what, how about we give you half of that now? And our intention is to give you the other half later, but can we get the first close discount on it? Hmm. And I'm surprised at how many firms have said yes to that. And we haven't had to put that in writing. We tell them that's our intent. And I will say, to be honest, so far, every time we've said we were going to do that, we have done that. But it's a nice way, I think, to get some first close discounts and not have to allocate all your money, and it helps reduce some of the blind pool risk. So just that, I think, and trying to be smarter with how we structure our documents. I think we're getting, the LP GP pendulum has swung a little bit back to the LP. So I think, trying to get slightly better terms than we have been able to get the last few years. I think those sorts of things. And I think the other one is, also looking where some areas capital is deprived. So we've actually done some stuff in the E&P space because capital is just so scarce there. And unfortunately, we're going to need oil and coal and all those things. We're not going to go out and build a gold mine, but we may be, involved with ancillary service to some of those kind of companies, right? So because we are, I think I know one of the things we could have talked about was ESG, but I think the good news here is, I think, is a function of our board and pensioners have said, your job is to make money for the pensions. And I think part of that has come from, we're a transit company. We're all about moving people cheaply and clean, as cleanly as we can. TTC is the largest fleet of electric buses in North America. So I think partly where my board comes from is we've already put our money where our mouth is, and we'll, let's make some money on the pension side. So we think in some of these areas, as well as transition, are some ways to make some money.
That's great. Thank you for sharing all that. Really interesting and insightful comments, and definitely a path for people who are listening in, both from the allocation side as well as the asset management side. So just 2 questions left for you, and they're more about you, because I've just found your history is very interesting. A quote that I've been taking through these conversations, at least the last month or so, is what you are is an expression of history. So where does your history show up in your life today?
That is such an unfair question, but it's a really good question. It's a really good question. So I would say that I've been able to have a lot of kind of positive and negative experiences in my life, And, I am a firm believer that things seem to happen for a reason. We may not know that in that time. But, whether it's, I think personally or professionally, I think, interestingly, we didn't get into that, but it was family reasons that brought me up to Toronto. And I feel like, maybe I was brought to Toronto for a reason, besides meeting my wife and having two wonderful kids here. But it really, I think the challenges I was also the benefit of having some really good mentors. And I was going to say, that's one thing I feel like you're never too old to have good mentors. I've been very lucky, and I still have, really some really phenomenal people that I'm able to bounce ideas off, things that I'm feeling, when I'm frustrated, I'm able to talk to them about those. And I think, I would just say, I wasn't the most patient earlier on in my career. I remember being in a job and somebody telling me to wait 6 months or something for a promotion. And I was like, I can't wait 6 months. That's too long. That's nothing now, right? I just, I wish I can go back in a time machine and tell myself to be a little bit more patient. And I just think that has helped me navigate, I think, some of the challenges I've had with my board. I talked about the trust thing. It enabled me to say, you know what, this is going to take me a couple of years. I'm not going to have the trust of the board of the CEO in 6 months. It's probably going to take a couple of years, right? I don't see them every day. I see my board members every 6 weeks or so, sometimes once a month. But so, it just takes a long time. So, I will say it's interesting. And in some ways, I feel like I've gone full circle in that, I came out of school wanting to be an economist. In some ways, I'm kind of an economist again, right? My role is become a strategist, right? So I think being able to look at the big picture, and I think my economist background, has kind of served me well at looking at, and also looking at history. I'm also a big. You made the comment about my history, but I'm a big fan of history, right? And so, what's the line? If you forget history, you're a folly to repeat it. So I just think that is really helpful. I know that we can't always look back. From a risk management perspective, we want to look back and say, oh, this is just like the GFC, and let's just model the GFC and that will help us. We have no idea, right? We just have no idea. The next blow up is going to happen for some other reason that we cannot model. So I think it's just, trying to be flexible. I think it's also, the belief that you have to kind of have a long-term horizon, focus on, you have to sometimes admit when you're wrong and move on. But I think, really having sometimes a fortitude when things are not going your way, you can check it and reaffirm it, but, to really stay the long-term course. And, I still remember some of the best advice I remember reading is, everybody thinks about kind of books that were really helpful for them. I remember a number of years ago reading Hedgehog by Barton Biggs. And I, probably anybody under 40 has no idea who Barton Biggs is. But Barton Biggs was a longtime Morgan Stanley economist. And I think his last go, he was involved with Blackstone or KKR. And so he wrote a great book called Hedgehogging. And I remember, and this is the nugget that I was going to get to, is and I still agree with this, is he thought it made more, or he got more out of looking at reading The Economist once a week. And, I know nobody can actually ever read the whole Economist because it's too long, but, because the Economist was big picture and thematic, and it was things thinking about every year. And he said, it's better to read The Economist than look at your Bloomberg screen. Because what happens is the human psyche, when we see red numbers flashing, or maybe even green numbers, but it's usually the red flashing does something in our brain, and we feel like we have to do something, right? And so whether it's your fund or your pension portfolio, like, it makes you want to do something. And I think that tries to distract us and keep us off course. It makes us second guess ourselves. over a day or a week. And I think, it's kind of the focus on the long picture and, this reminder of history.
Well, we are so happy that your history has brought us here today to have this wonderful conversation. It was really wonderful to speak with you, to hear your thoughts and your success. Congratulations again. It's really wonderful, as I keep saying. So thank you for being here, Andy. I greatly appreciate it.
Rob, thank you very much. I'm really flattered that you reached out on this, and I've really enjoyed. You and I have had a couple of conversations now, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you and your audience. So thank you very much for that.
If you want to learn more about Andy and the TTC pension plan, please visit their website at www.ttcpp.ca. You can find this episode and past episodes on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. We are also available on YouTube if you prefer to watch while you listen. If you'd like to catch up on past episodes, check out our website at Dakota.com. Finally, if you like what you're seeing and hearing, please be sure to like, follow, and share these episodes. We welcome your feedback as well. Andy, thank you again for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for investing your time with Dakota.
Don't say goodbye.